Thanks, Paul, for jumping on a call with me. It's an interesting topic, and you have been the one who commented in the most precise way and probably the shortest way from everybody, with simply saying mostly waste of time. And I would take it like you taught us back 10 years ago with Paint Funnel. Can you be more specific about it? Can you tell me how long this has been a problem? And most importantly, did you try something else that worked or that maybe did not work?
Okay, I can probably hold one of those three questions in my head at a time. So we'll start with the first one and see where we go. Although I should know the other two. Yeah, it's an interesting topic because, and the reason why I said it's mostly a waste of time, put some context onto that. The way people want it measured is a waste of time because there's just too many variables in sales enablement and training and interventions to be able to track that to an impact on the bottom line in a large enterprise organization. In a really small company, it's a lot different. But in a large organization, look at all the other impacts that have an impact on the bottom line. There's branding, there's the performance of the salespeople themselves, there's management, there's the economy, there's cycles, there's different quarters, there's different products that have greater demand given the time of the year. There's just way too many variables. It's like we have this at the moment with the pandemic, and there's all of these different measures people tried to put in place to control a virus. And no one measure in itself, even though people would like it to, you can point to, say, mask wearing, oh, that's going to reduce it by X amount. There's just too many variables. And it's the exact same with this. I think a better question is, what can we measure objectively that can determine whether or not the goals of the training have been met? It's a different question to say whether those goals were the right goals in order to have an impact on the business. But in order to determine if the goals were met, what we can do and what organizations are doing, I see them doing, is where they will, in advance, sometimes 3 months in advance, that they'll start recording the salesperson's behavior using tools like Gong, for example. And they'll record their calls. And Gong in itself can do a certain amount of analysis in terms of who's doing most of the talking, what kind of questions were asked. He can transcribe it. And then you can do a more subjective analysis as well. On top of that, you can listen in and validate the data, etc. But you have to track that. And then you have to determine, well, what do I need to change here? Maybe I need to change the types of questions people are asking. Maybe I need to change how people are introducing the goals of the call, for example, or whether there is a momentum in the call and a firm next step. Right. So we can determine, say, look, in 9 out of 10 of our calls, these are absent. And therefore, if we had them, we believe we would have a better sales call. And then the data can back that up later on. But it is a longitudinal study. You have to take it at least over 6 months, 2-3 months beforehand to capture as is. Because everybody says, oh yeah, I do it this way, I do it that way, until they see how it's going. You know, there's a lot of those programs you see on TV where they'll go into somebody's home. The home is people where they're overweight, for example. And they'll say, okay, in order to reduce your weight, you're going to have to reduce your calories by X amount. And they'll get people to do a food diary. And they'll say, I only eat an apple for breakfast and an orange for lunch and a banana for dinner. And you think by listening to them that they have the appetites of mice. But then they have all these secret cameras following them around. And they stop off on the way home for a Big Mac. And then they sneak off to their fridge for a can of Coke, right? And so what people say they do and what they actually do are two very different things. With the best will in the world, it's exactly the same in our sales conversation, me included.
And there was always a workaround. When I remember my time when I was doing sales, whenever the metric was how many calls are you doing, you start calling people. Doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. It's not quality, it's quantity at the end.
If I can break the metric, I will. It's exactly the same. It's still true. And therefore, but if you capture it, then that's the reality. That's it. And you don't just capture people on their best or their worst day, but you have it over a period of time that kind of irons out and smooths out the bumps in everyday life. You can have a bad day because of what's going on in your life. You can be ill for a couple of days, but over a 2-3 month period, you're going to get a much more accurate picture. And an AI can really draw out of that some firm conclusions, and then they can be validated by real humans. And then what you do is you put your intervention in place as training and coaching. And what I've seen companies do really successfully as well is, for example, if there's key phrases, you'll know with an upfront contract, for example, we want to start by agreeing on how much time we're going to spend and what the next steps are. And I can have some key phrases in there that says, for example, are you okay for half an hour? And I mention the time as an element. And I talk about agendas. Well, I can also tag those phrases. So I can now determine after the training if people are using those certain keywords and questions. There's always 3 or 4 questions that need to be asked. And they're different for different organizations. I'm not talking about things like tell me more, give me an example, how long has that been an issue. These are generic that apply everywhere. But there's company specific ones that are specific to that industry and market you're selling into. For example, it might be how many users do you have? Something simple, right? But I can tag that and I can determine how many people are now asking that specific question. So I can now quantitatively determine whether the behavior is changing. And that's an objective thing.
Quality point of view of the things that really happen. It's not only the quantity with a snapshot of a time and saying this is the statistics at the moment. It is first of all watching a period of time, very important, but at the same time watching the content of it. Do they raise the questions? Is it the right question? Maybe they raise the question, we teach them, but in reality we find out we need to raise other questions. So this is something you have to guide and
Absolutely. And then you can look at performance of one rep versus another, whether they're different, in sync. And then you can take out some empirical analysis out of that. Again, we go back to the virus and look at the vaccine, and different vaccines can say, well, it's 95% effective, and here's the data. And we can do and you can draw conclusions from that in terms of the impact that vaccine is going to have on a population. And we can do that as well with the data. We can say is, look, these 3 reps, for example, were using, adapted the training and are using what we want them to use and doing what we want them to do. And their sales has increased by 10%, where reps who haven't have only increased their sales by 5%. And that's where you can get some qualitative data as well that can measure the impact, but it has to be tied to specific behaviors that you can measure over a period of time.
This is what you say to me is like you give a training, you deliver a training to the sales, and then the measurement is related to the training you gave up front, because the training defines what is the successful factors, what should they do, what do we want them to do, and those factors we need to measure now in order to see if they are doing it and if they're doing it successfully and if they're doing it in the right way. So the training up front is giving the input.
Yeah. And it would be great as well, because too many trainings are generic. It would be great if you could take a snapshot of what people are actually doing in an organization and then base the training around that. Because you can say, well, look, you're doing this well, this well, this well, this well. This is absent, and if we added those 2 in, it would make a big difference and really take this forward. Rather than just say, well, come in and train on this particular process or methodology. And then what you have to do is, because that in itself is boring and people are kind of going, well, I do this already. And you don't have the data to say, actually, this is what we found. We're not doing it. Or you're not wasting time training people on stuff that they're already doing well, which again is a waste of time.
It's very important to figure out if there is already things they're doing well, because it's like never change a running system. If it's anyway running and this guy is doing it maybe without even the training, don't change that. Don't intervene there, because he's anyway doing a good job, and let him go. Maybe others can copy it, of course, and for sure probably when you're setting up trainings, you also, first of all, I know that you're first of all listening to the customer. You're not selling the training like just to sell an hour of training or a day of training. I know that you're listening to the customers first. And this is the very most important thing, like what is there today? What is happening today? what are good performers, what are not good performers, and how can I improve part of them. Because for sure it's not working for everybody, but most of the time you change slightly things, some small things, just the way people ask, for example, and even, for example, the way that they already know questions they could raise, so that they really can concentrate on active listening is a good thing. But those are all quality things. And as I agreed with your comment already, mostly waste of time. It's really hard to measure them, and it's for sure a lot of time. It's not like pressing a button in any CRM and saying like, I got the numbers now, this is the revenue. You have to dive deeper into it and do a manual evaluation, of course. Yeah.
For sure. And I think good training as well should be organic. I mean, not every organization can go in and get 3 months of data before an intervention and therefore afterwards. You can do that in a large organization across the departments. But if you're going in on a team of 10 people, it's harder to do. And then there may be some GDPR type issues as well with recording calls. But I mean, there's ways around that. However, I acknowledge they exist. But what you can still do, if you have the right trainers in place who can role play scenarios with attendees and put them into a role play, but real world context, and then see objectively what they do. The number of times I've done this over the years, and you have people say, and of course, and I give credit to Ian Spandau for this. He had a great term, which is a meaningful failure experience, where you put them into a scenario where you know they're not going to perform 10 out of 10. And what you're always looking to do is identify where their blind spots are. And what people will often do is they'll go, oh yeah, but you know, when in the real world, when I do this on the phone, I don't make these mistakes at all. And I'm going, yeah, but why? So why are you doing them now? There's no answer to that. However, again, what you can do is you can capture that. And if you want to capture what's happening organically in a workshop where people are coming in and you can look at, say, a call simulation they're doing, and you can objectively say, they're doing this well, doing this well, but what they're not doing, for example, is moving the conversation forward. And you can say 7 out of 10 failed that step, for example. And then you can say, okay, after the intervention, only 1 out of 10 failed that step, for example. And then you can take some data and look at the impact and track it over time as well. But in order for that to happen, there needs to be effective coaching in place as well, because what happens is the training wears off unless it's reinforced consistently. And managers need to be involved, coaches need to be involved. And if that doesn't happen, yeah, it's a waste of time. So when people are asking, can you measure this? I think it's the wrong question. I think the question is, what can we measure that can be quantitatively linked to performance, but also what are the post-training interventions that need to take place that have to happen in order for this to be sustained? You know, there's a great example, and I'll send it to you. You might be able to insert it into this. And it was a study done by a couple, again, their names escape me right now, but they looked at the impact of training transfer from the classroom to the job. And I think this is relevant to our topic today. Yeah. And it looked at, if you can imagine that a model with 9 boxes. And so there's 3 columns and 3 rows. And if we take the columns, it's what happens before the training, during the training, and after the training. If we take that as the columns. And then we look in the rows at the top is the rep, the manager, and the trainer. 3 people having impact on what happens. And you look at the number one impact on the transfer of an application of what they've learned onto the job comes with the work that the manager does before the training. The second highest impact on the transfer of training is the work that the manager does after the training. And the third impact is on the rep during the training. And only the trainer is the fourth impact in terms of Do I believe the trainer? Do they keep my attention? Was the content relevant? All of those kind of questions. But guess what gets discussed mostly before training gets planned? It's always, what content are we going to work on? And we leave out the three most important: how well reps are prepared, managers' preparation of those reps before they go in, how they set the tone for the training, the expectations they set, the context for the training, and then afterwards the reinforcement and coaching, etc., that takes place. All vitally important.
What you're mainly saying is that managers also have to be a kind of coach, because
100%.
they need to prepare. Okay.
Yeah. If I or you take the role as trainer and you have a class, you might have somebody for 2 days in a 3-month period, if you're lucky. Well, the manager has them for all the other time. So it's not a fair contest in terms of who is going to have an impact. And it shouldn't be, by the way. It's our job is to help people navigate and to simplify their way through a change process, a learning process. So our job is to help them identify where the blind spots are and give them the tools and techniques and encouragement and support and confidence to change their behavior in order to close those gaps. That's our job. But if it's not reinforced, is not sustained, people just go back to the default of what they hear around them. They go back to old habits. We all go back to old habits, no matter what it is.
In my career, I saw, while doing a lot of trainings, that especially what you're mentioning there, the failure stories are, of course, the coachable moments. They are the moments where people learn most from it. I even had a class in San Francisco back 2 years. They, after the third day of training, asked me, Florian, it's nice that we have a lot of success stories, but now we know each other. We have 30 people in the room. Maybe we can share stories of our failures where things did not work out. But there is a lot of trust necessary. And this is always the question. So I was the coach, so I was off text, so I was off HR, but they were not able to discuss this with their management, because this is HR, this is the one who can fire me, if I tell them what I did wrong. So there must be a lot of trust in order to get that. But it's the most powerful measurement probably, and I agree with you, if you measure what's not working and to measure why it is not working, because there you can get a little bit more to know where you should head to, what you should implement.
Yeah, I also think we need to change the culture in organizations that what we call failure is celebrated. Now, please don't get me wrong. I don't mean that we should go out of our way to fail in order to get rewards, but it should be considered. It should be normalized to be able to say, I screwed up on this call. So long as we're then able to say, here's why I screwed up and here's what I'm doing to make sure it doesn't happen again. But people, for different reasons, are afraid to admit to that. One is just some people are, it's in their personality. Could you imagine, and I'll use an extreme example only because it's topical right now, could you imagine a Donald Trump type character ever admitting to a fault? It's just not going to happen. And you will have that in organizations. People, if there's a macho culture particularly, admitting in front of people that you weren't as good as you portrayed you were, can be difficult. And then, as you say, sometimes it can be, people's fear is that it'll be used against them some stage and they'll be put on some sort of pip. And that's the culture that needs to change. One is we're making sure we're hiring only people who are comfortable being vulnerable.
It's the manager who can change that.
Yes,
if
100%.
the team is working in an environment where they are open and see no threat is there, they can do that. And to be honest, I agree with you. I would have get a lot of rewards in my life for failures. So there was a lot of coachable moments, and I really gained from that. If something works perfectly, you don't learn from it. That's the point. You did it, but most of the time not on purpose. That's the big issue.
Yeah.
I want to come back.
The manager's fault, by the way.
I want to come back to one thing you just mentioned at the beginning. And this is interesting to me because we have some listeners also from startups, but also from large companies. And you made the difference between both of them. So a small team with a startup and the large company with processes and things like that. And a lot of people, especially startups, who are growing the first 2-3 years, now should get into, let's say, a model of scalability and a real large business process, And it's hard to convert. How would you treat a small team like a startup, and what advice could you give to the large company?
How would I, what with the startup?
So the startup is, imagine we just start a business. We have a famous and amazing idea about something, whatever it is, technology, IT, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I'm setting up my first 3 or 4 salespeople now.
Yeah.
I recruit them, I find them.
Yeah.
Let's assume I find people who are willing to learn.
Yeah.
How can I train them?
Okay, so here's my experience. When I started out doing this, 18 years ago, I did talk to startups quite a bit, and I came from that kind of background myself. I understood it, and what I've observed is that from a training perspective, and I'm, as an external provider, for example, I'll forget about anybody in their first 6 months to a year of being a startup, because there is an irrational exuberance. They've just got funding. They've probably got their first customer. And the truth is, the founders, even if they're from a tech background, it's often said technical people, the founders are not great at selling, and maybe they don't have any particular methodology, but what they do have is they have passion and they have a story. And that's the key thing. They have a story. They're able to say, we founded this company because we saw there was this problem in the market. And they're able to talk to the pain. And they're able to demonstrate that what they've put in place is a solution. And they're passionate about it, and they've got that energy and drive that you cannot hold them back. And for every good reason, they don't need sales training. At that stage. And the other side is they don't believe they need it, because when you start a company, you need to be able to shut out all the doubters and people who say this is not going to work, right? So you're in a very blinkered mindset. This is going to work. Your head is down, and you're just so full of energy. Training, that's for another day, right? So that's the first period. And then you're going to hire your first team. So now you're into, we got to scale this thing, because as the founder, I can't do everything myself. And unless they've got a hiring background, everybody believes they're a legend when it comes to hiring, that they've got a gut sense that knows how to pick the winners from everybody else. You have to let them at it. They have to, you see, people have to find the pain. So you have to have those first few hires, and then for them to realize they've screwed up, that this is not working out the way they'd planned. And only at that point where they're willing to acknowledge that it's not turning out the way they'd planned, can you have a conversation around what needs to be put in place. And then there's all of these inflection points as they grow, in terms of, well, if I'm getting a lot of leads in, when I start out, I'm not spending money on CRM tools, for example. But at some point, that just becomes a pain, that I'm overwhelmed and I need something to control it. It's exactly the same with people. Now I've got 3 or 4 salespeople. I, as the founder, can't manage them all myself. I'm out selling myself, and I just can't do it. So now I need a manager. And of course, every manager comes in and sells themselves to the founder on the fact that they're going to be able to solve all the problems. They come in as the magic solution to everything. And it takes some time before the founder finds out that that's not true either. And it's hard for the manager then to turn around to the founder and say, after 6 months, and say, you know, the way I told you that I'm a magic, I'm the magic guy, and I can cure sales cancer, and I can do everything. Well, these people you put me managing, and they're deadbeats. We have to get rid of those and hire new people, right? And so there's all of this floundering around that happens before the founder, if they don't have prior experience of this, before they realize that, you know what, maybe my gut isn't as good as I thought it was. Maybe there's something to this sales that I don't know about, or that I'm not asking the right questions, or looking in the right places, whatever it is. They have to be in pain. No pain, no sale. And it takes a while for people to be in pain. That's one of the reasons why we ask that question: how long has this been an issue? Mm-hmm. If it hasn't been a problem for long enough,
it's not worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not considering it.
Now, there are exceptions to that, obviously. If Amazon servers go down overnight and they're losing business every second, that's different.
It's an immense pain.
By exception.
Yeah.
But by exception.
Okay.
And so that's what I would say to, if I'm looking at founders from the outside, is it takes time and they have to learn those mistakes. And it's one of the reasons why they say most founders screw up their first or second venture before they learn the lessons. It's a shame because those lessons have been learned a million times before.
That's right. You do not have to reinvent the wheel.
Everybody
you could just look at best practices,
different
failures, and things like that. Absolutely, I agree with you. And I'm working a lot with startups, and I was a startup also, and I know exactly what you're talking about. This is exactly the stages, and I know that the founder and the inventor of whatever magic you have in your hands and with whatever you want to sell is not the best to lead it into the scalability, because there it's sales, it's clear business, and if you are too much with your heart into it, it stops the sales and it prevents from good business. And that's sometimes an issue. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the other factor they often forget about as well when it comes to building out a sales team is that who they're calling on changes as well. So, for example, and if you ever read Crossing the Chasm, and early stage customers have to be very open to new technology and new ways of doing things. You're never going to sell a new solution to a very conservative customer, to a middle manager in an organization who's never going to take that kind of risk. So you have to find the right type of companies with the right types of leaders to sell to. But then as you scale and you get those early stage logos, then who you sell to in order to scale is going to change as well. And that's not often factored into, well, if I'm going to be selling now to a HR manager, what type of individual do I need that's going to connect well with that individual, understand their world, and work with them effectively in order to integrate this kind of change?
Absolutely, I completely agreed. And thanks for the explaining your short comments on my post. I really appreciate it. I was reading it and I understood, because we know each other. I understood exactly what you want to say. And now you made it a little bit more clear for all the others what's behind it.
Yeah. Well, the reason why it was short, Florian, is who had time for this kind of conversation on LinkedIn?
Yeah, that's
imagine what that post would look like.
That's the point. That's the point. Yeah. People have really short attention span, less awareness. We have to fight for awareness, for attention from the people. And this is what we're doing in field enablement and readiness at the moment. It's like, okay, you can give the trainings, but you need to give them updates and news. And people are not willing to listen to a long video, or if you take online videos, if it's more than 3 minutes, sometimes even more than 90 seconds, they already quit. And if you don't tell them after 50 seconds what the video is starting, what is in the video, they will click to the next one. Doesn't matter if it was the right one or not. And you see, there are measurements you can take, but it's nothing that really helps to measure the quality of it. That's the point, and therefore we still need our eyes, our ears, and the understanding what should be the right way, and to understand how to get along with failures.
And those attention spans, Florian, are only getting shorter. If you look at it, what's a TikTok video, 30 seconds, or not 15 seconds even, some of them, and I look at them sometimes, and if they haven't got my attention in the first 4 seconds, flip.
I had a nice example with one of my customers, and he had 40 salespeople in Germany. They were selling a product, and I told them, let's make a WhatsApp group just to inform the 40 people 2 times a week about something new. And then he called me and said, like, it's amazing. The first message we sent out was a message that everybody who is buying our product is getting from the government, is getting money in cash immediately when he orders with us, because we're certified. And everybody from those 40 people were dialing into the company and saying, like, this is amazing, we need to tell this to everybody and whatever. And I told him, listen, that's crazy, that's cool, isn't it? So it's working. And he said, yeah, but you know what? Exactly this message, they have, all of them, they have it since 2 months in their email inbox, but nobody was reading it. And that's the point. Yeah. That's the point.
Yeah, for sure.
To focus and to figure out what's the quality.
Yep, that's true. If you ever want to test people's retention of information, just ask them to recite the emergency announcement on an airplane. We've all heard it hundreds of times, but try to do it. You can't.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Paul, thanks a lot for this conversation. I'm happy to spend the time with you, because it's really helpful. It's really a good assistance and explains a little bit more what we're experiencing in our world. And I hope to see you soon again.
Likewise. Take care, Florian. Good to
Bye-bye.
talk to you. All right, bye now.